Alright, it's been a very interesting year for horror up to this point, and now we've got five more of those over the span of the last couple of months or so that we're going to talk about here. Some brand new and some from like nearly 2 months ago, so or at least one from nearly 2 months ago. And it's quite a good group overall, surprisingly, because the one we're going to start with is the weakest of the bunch. So let's start with the new Hellraiser, which I don't know if the problem right away was that I actually had decent hopes for it, because typically when you think of another Hellraiser movie, it could really go either way. For the most part, I would say I'm not a massive fan of the franchise as a whole, but I'm completely in love with the original movie and always have been. And the second movie I kind of took to, and every now and then one will come along that is interesting enough to not be shit. But like I thought Inferno was not great, but it was crazy enough to almost kind of bring us back to that kind of starting point. I know some people take a lot to Bloodline. I didn't really, and I think the most recent one, the one that Gary Tonovoff did, Judgment, I think it was. I remember thinking there was some inspired stuff in there, but overall, there's a lot of shit in this franchise, and the the thing that had my hopes high though was the fact that David Bruckner was doing it fresh off of the Night House, which I really liked, and Rebecca Hall is absolutely amazing in. And he also did The Ritual, and just he has other movies, but like just based on those two alone, it's kind of like there's definitely a vision here. There's somebody that could really bring a lot to the genre. And when I found out that he had this, I just immediately thought like, oh okay, this could be interesting. And I honestly didn't really have many doubts about it. I figured it would at least be relatively good, at least. But it honestly didn't take long for me to feel like it maybe wasn't what I was kind of hoping it was going to be. I think a lot of it starts with the characters that we have here are just kind of in general not very interesting in there. They seem like they're in a different movie entirely, first of all. And it's, while there are things, that Hellraiser has incorporated as far as its characters and where its characters are coming from, it certainly kind of fits the bill or what the characters are going for, but there's just something missing, I feel like, with these characters. I didn't feel like any sort of connection to them in any way, and I think a lot of that also has to do with the fact that it didn't feel like there was much of a connection between them themselves with each other. So, like, you have, the recovering addict who is now gotten caught up with a fellow addict who is still drinking. And then you have a brother and the brother's boyfriend and the roommate, and that's pretty much just what most of these characters were just their titles. Like, that's the brother, that's the brother's boyfriend, that's the roommate, and these are the characters. Their personalities, basically, it kind of felt like fan movie acting. Like, when you see people just kind of make the fan movies, like, essentially in their backyard with their friends, and then somehow they end up online or whatever. And they're, like, based on, but typically horror movies also. It just feels like one of those, as far as the acting goes and the interactions. There's a lot of comedic interactions, comedic in quotes, where the opening scene is the couple fucking, and then they come into the living room and everybody's there, and there's this attempt at a comedic delivery of like, you heard us fucking, didn't you? Like something out of a comedy or something, and a bad comedy at that. And then like later on, her and her brother are fighting, and she, like, the whole scene just stops in mid drama for her to look in the other room and say, "Hey, did you guys just turn down the TV to listen to us arguing? Like, did you really just do that?" That delivery. And that's not doing any favors to the setups for these characters. And it's like even when they're trying, when they're trying to do the drama, for some reason they're interrupting it with these attempts at comedic beats, like they're a fucking Marvel movie or something. That was just not a great start. But then I think another problem when you talk about it having a very very capable director, and you're wondering kind of surely this can't go too wrong if it does, but it does seem like it's missing this sort of surreal quality. At least, if I guess if we're going strictly back to like the original, that sort of surreal quality that it had, and like this nightmarish quality where it's like, even though there's been like, I want to say this is like the 11th Hellraiser movie, I think. Despite there being like 11 of these, I still, whenever I watch the original movie, have a thought like, I still don't feel like I've ever seen anything like this. And it's like it's really just its very own thing and this very particular vision, and it's apparently very hard to find. You can bring in interesting Cenobites, and you can bring in like really wild death scenes or whatever, and all that crazy shit. But there's just something about the feel of the original, and I don't know if it's because the thing about it is when you talk about the characters and how they interact and how a lot of them maybe feel cliche or generic, the plot of the plot that's kind of in the middle of the original movie, despite all of its craziness, is essentially just kind of like a soap opera plot. And I think he even kind of went for like the soap opera look, almost seemingly intentionally sometimes. But like I said, it's the way those weirdly fuse together in a way that you would never have expected, to where that actually felt like it melded into the horror story so easily, so like weirdly, eerily easily. And this just feels so distant. Like I said, it feels like two completely different movies are happening, and they're having this weird sort of crossover whenever the Cenobites even come into it. And none of it. I was gonna say it has more of the feel of the sequels than the original, to be insulting, but most of the time it doesn't even really feel like a Hellraiser movie. And when I was saying the fact that it has a capable director, it doesn't even feel like a director's movie. It feels more like a company's movie. It feels like a Hulu movie, which I know is what it is, but still, I would expect it to feel like a director's movie coming from a director that has such a great vision most of the time. But something was really missing here. There, like every now and then, there's a good shot. Like when we see, I'm assuming that's supposed to be Pinhead. But I think one of the subtitles said that it was. We see Pinhead like from a distance every now and then. It almost looks like one of the ghost shots from The Innocents or something like that, which is kind of well done. There is one good scene where the Cenobites kind of arrive. I think this might be the first time they arrive in the movie. It's one of the first times they arrive in the movie, and just the sound of the breathing and the way they use that, to kind of build up the terror of what they are before you even really get a good look at them, is something that's well done. And there's a quick scene of her having like a vision of her brother, and like that's like one of the only times it sort of feels like a Hellraiser movie. And it's like, and most of like this stuff is like maybe an hour in, and that's and that's a problem too. That's probably one of the biggest problems, is the fact that the movie is 2 hours long, like a full 2 hours. It's like 2 hours plus a minute. And it's like that's another thing also, is even though I had hopes for it and I had hopes for the director and stuff like that, as soon as I turned it on and I saw the runtime, just some kind of fear happened in me where it's like, I have a feeling they didn't earn that. I have a feeling it does not utilize a full 2 hours. I just have a bad feeling so suddenly. Yeah, there it was. So talking about the characters, there's, I think one thing that really stands out as just not really meshing is this whole relationship with this couple, where it's like there's other things going on here, as are revealed later, admittedly, but still, there's just something off about this relationship with the two of them, where it's like, I think what makes it feel especially off is that the way it's approaching the main character, as this character that we're supposed to really, really sympathize with and really understand as she goes into the situation. That's why we get so much movie devoted to just her life problems before any of this crazy shit even goes on. But the fact that it all starts with her wanting to be with this dude who met her in like a 5-step program but is still drinking himself, and there's a whole fight with her and her brother about how her brother's saying, like, this is like really bad for you, this is a terrible decision, this is like the worst person you could have ended up with. And that whole thing plays out, and so we get the idea of, like, there's going to be some kind of turnaround here, there's going to be some kind of character arc here or something. The character arc just pretty much ends up being that, you know, one of them is unsavory, and you can probably guess who, but it has ulterior motives. But the thing, though, is that there's a moment, like, right in the middle, before everything really goes down, where a lot of horror has already happened, and then there's, like, the downplayed time where everybody's, like, just kind of happy to be alive and happy to still be together and stuff like that. And they have this very tender moment where she, like, cuddles with him, and it's like this, oh, as long as she has him, she feels safe kind of feeling, without dialogue or saying that or anything. And it's like, no, he's the reason she got into this whole thing. He's the reason she ended up with the box, because he pressured her into it. And then the whole thing of, he's certainly not good for her addiction at all, and he doesn't even seem to really care about her addiction at all, despite the fact that he tells her he loves her in the first scene, and it's like this big deal. And that this is like this tender moment between them, like, he's definitely the guy. And it's like, no, because think about this. Think about another thing about having an addict as your main character in a horror movie with this much horror in it. Like, it's a Hellraiser movie, for God's sake. And it's like, it almost feels pointless because you put an addict that's recovered, or recovering, through everything that happens in this movie. And is that person going to be able to stay recovered after everything they go through in this movie? It feels like it's all pointless because there's no way. But that's the thing, is I guess you're not supposed to think about that. But that's the thing, is if this movie were more fucking interesting, I probably would be thinking more about, the rest of the movie. But the fact that I'm just caught up on this whole, what's going to happen to her addiction when this is all over? Because she's going to have been through some shit after this. And it's probably going to bring her back to the vices. And that's where I was for this movie, because I honestly just could not give an absolute shit about anything else. And I didn't even care about the characters either, so I wasn't even really caring about this. It was just, I was just curious, like, oh, she's definitely gonna relapse after this. Like, that's... So, what's the good of any ending that comes with this? And that's even if she ends up alive. And it's like, oh, she's just probably gonna relapse again because this is some crazy shit. So, I don't know how to take this. I really just wasn't into it. I was really hoping there would be something here, but they do not utilize that runtime at all. They do not utilize giving this much backstory to the characters because they still feel generic, and there's really no reason to give a fuck what happens to anybody. It's all just, like I said, it feels like a streaming movie with, like, the kind of acting and developments you would expect from something like that. Not, or like I said, even the shit Hellraiser movies utilized the concept and kind of tried to go in other directions or tried to do something creatively with everything. And while this does, have, like, impressive makeup and stuff like that, which just kind of comes with the territory. I don't want to undermine it, but it also should come with the territory. Like, that's kind of, like, the lowest bar is, if you're going to make a Hellraiser movie, make sure you have great makeup. That's just literally step one. But it is amazing. So I do want to not undermine that too much. But yeah, the fact that they basically did a little bit of the bare minimum, but then everything else is just who the fuck cares. That's the thing that's really confusing, is having a forgettable Hellraiser movie, because that's what's going to happen to this movie, is I'm going to probably completely forget about it. And that's just kind of crazy, because, like I said, even the shittier Hellraiser movies have their memorable moments in them. That, like I said, that should really just come with the territory. The kind of shit that's going to be in this, where it's like, I don't expect, like, the the stuff of eternal nightmares, like, you know, Andy Robinson with his face stretched out saying, you know, Jesus wept, or the spinning, you know, pillar or whatever. That all that imagery in the first movie that is just gonna stick forever. Like, I wasn't even asking anything like that, but something at least a little memorable would have helped. But I really think this movie's just gonna go in and out. So, and I like, honestly, just sitting here, I feel like I completely wasted time. I feel like I didn't really say anything at all, because that's just what the movie leaves me with, is not a whole lot of anything. So, that's really unfortunate. Like I said, I'm hoping this is a case where it was like, this wasn't Bruckner's exact vision, and this was like more of a, you know, overall production thing and higher ups or something, because he is much more, you know, inspired than this and better at his job than this. So I don't feel like this is a Bruckner movie. So that's yeah. So a lot of, so there's, it feels like there's a lot of explanations for why it feels the way that it does. How it came to be this is a whole other question. So yeah. So let's go on to Smile, a movie that's definitely got marketing down. And what's actually impressive about that is that this is probably a very hard concept to pull off. Like, when I first heard about the movie and saw, you know, that image of Caitlin Stacey smiling, it was like, this could go really downhill really fast. This is definitely a gamble, because we already had, I'm sure there's multiple, you know, grinning horror movies, but the most recent one, apart from this one that comes to mind, is when Blumhouse did that Truth or Dare movie, which was an absolute laughingstock and a cringe factory and every other negative thing you could throw at that movie. And I can only imagine how humiliating it must have been for that cast. So Caitlin Stacey must be thrilled that not only did this movie execute its concept well, but her doing the Smile thing, with as much marketing as out there for this movie and the scene itself within the movie, is probably, with all of the horror we've had come out this year, and Caitlin Stacey smiling is probably, to me, I think, probably one of the more iconic images for the genre coming out of this year. And that's where you can tell that they pulled the concept off. Like I said, that I'm sure they're all relieved, because this could have gone terribly. This could have been a concept that was laughed out of the theater, but somehow they managed to make it work. And just right away, honestly, like, there's, like, just the opening shots alone are shot in such a way where you kind of feel like you're in this alternate world where, like, only bad and unsettling things happen. Just right away, they set up this kind of feel. And it's like, just even the way, like, you know, the camera turns or whatever, it almost feels kind of James Wan inspired with some of the camera tricks that they do here. But specifically, you can move the camera around and do all that stuff. You can turn it upside down, you can turn it sideways, you can move it, you know, in and out or whatever. But the best stuff is when you know when to just let the camera sit there for a while, and not cut away. So I was especially, like, you kind of get that feeling where it's like, okay, I think this is going to be something good in the early scenes, where we have the big scene, like the big scene of the movie that sets everything off. And I love that it is a shot that just holds without cutting away, and it feels like it lasts for an eternity in a very good way, because it's one of those cases where, as it goes on, you think it's going to cut away. Like, your brain has been programmed by other movies enough to where it's like, the longer this goes on, the more likely it is there's going to be a cut soon. And it just kind of keeps going without, it just holds on one shot. The camera's not moving or anything. And it's like, right here in these early moments, the movie sets up that it knows exactly what it's doing. And that's going to help this out a lot. And it's not just the fact that it's executing it well, but the confidence to go into it. Because, like I said, it was going to be a tricky concept anyway, and you do have to go into it with confidence, and that's what the movie has. I mean, I would say, like, I say there's always a lack of confidence in movies that do, like, you know, like the stuff where they show you the ending and then we go back and then we circle back around and all that could be seen as a lack of confidence, and jump scares could be seen as a lack of confidence. Um, there's not there it does feel like there's a lot of jump scares in it, but I feel like most of them are fine. There's only really a couple that stand out as like, oh, that was kind of unnecessary. Like where we cut to like we're in a completely different scene and then we cut to like the next day, and our main character is getting ready to get hit by a car, and then it stops and like honks at her, and the cut to this car is a jump scare, and it's like it would be effective enough if it was like, you know, that cut by itself and him honking or whatever, but there's like a screaming sound that doesn't really come from anywhere attached to it, and stuff like that is where I feel like confidence gets lost a little bit. But for the most part, it does feel like um, the movie has a confidence about it. There's one particular jump scare that really works especially, and once again, I'm very glad that I don't watch trailers. It's interesting that I don't pay attention to like any marketing, like TV spots or anything like that. Yet I still know the marketing all over as Caitlin Stacey's face. Like that's how effective the marketing is. Is that I've still seen that image like a billion times before I saw this. But the the thing here is that I had heard before that there was a moment that everybody wished wasn't in the trailer. And while I don't know this for sure, I'm going to assume it's the scene that I'm thinking of. So that was really well done also, where it's like they kind of give you the idea that something's going to happen because of what's been set up through the whole movie, and then something else entirely goes in that direction. You can tell they kind of did that consciously, where it's like, you know, we're really late into the movie at this point. Let's just... They're going to know what's coming here, so let's just do something completely different. Like, it's not even coming from a particular place, it's just something completely different is why it happens. And sometimes that's all you need, especially in horror. And especially when you're working with, like, you know, having visions and stuff like that. Another thing that could be kind of tiresome, where it's like, every time a scene happens, it could always be, like, just a vision or a dream sequence or something. And that could suck the suspense out of a movie pretty easily, because once you kind of start to expect that, then you're just expecting it all the time, and then the scenes will lose their luster, because you'll stop caring what's real and what isn't, which is the last thing that the people making it want you to do. But I feel like they utilize those just enough. Like they might be on the cusp of overdoing it, but they just hold back enough to where it's interesting to go into a scene and not know if it's going to be real or a vision or a dream or whatever, because they kind of switch it up just enough. And so that's another thing this movie does well, is the fact that it sets up something that always seems pretty obvious, but then there's just enough of a tweak to it that you kind of don't mind if it's something that you've seen before. Where it's like, this is going to be one of those movies where nobody believes the protagonist, and she's going to be trying desperately to convince the people of what's going on around her, and everybody just thinks she's crazy, and it's like, how many times have we seen that, and how tired is that? But I do think this movie has an advantage on that trope, because this character is a therapist, and it's like seeing the character at the beginning versus, you know, the middle and then towards the end. It does, like, it feels like we're getting farther and farther away, and the character's getting farther and farther away from the position that she had at the start of the movie. So that's kind of interesting to see as more people start to believe that she might be insane. There's the whole investigation aspect that's in, like, almost every supernatural movie ever, where it's like, once we've had over an hour of scares, then the main character will start researching stuff, go to a library or go to Google or whatever, and do this whole sort of research thing. That's in every single one of these movies, but there is something intriguing enough about the concept. Like, where it's like this chain that has continued for some time. This chain that goes back to where we're not even completely sure. And seeing that, I feel like, is intriguing enough. And we get to the point where, in this investigation, eventually we're going to run into a well-respected actor having one scene that's been through this and witnessed it and will explain to us what's happening. In this case, the respected actor is Rob Morgan, And the direction that this scene goes so abruptly is very well done. There's like I think what's great about this also is Sosie Bacon, our lead actress, has this way of being able to go from like the way she kind of goes into her sort of manic states as it goes on throughout it, and the performance gets a lot more intense, and the fact that typically it's just like the character doesn't seem to go through a physical change in movies like this, but it's like as the movie goes on, the more unhinged she starts to look. Like it's like her behavior's there and everything, but it's like I like the fact that she actually looks like somebody that is not well. And so it's even more like we're kind of even more in the mindset of the people around her when she sounds crazy with what she's saying, and it's like instead of saying like, "Oh, these stupid people won't believe her," it's more like, "I get it. I get why they wouldn't believe this coming from this person." And so I really like the way they handled that also, and the way she handled her performance, kind of getting that more and more to that point as it went on. Um, there's also a lot of clever visuals going on here, like the moment when somebody who has had their throat cut is under a white sheet, and the blood that's bleeding through the sheet is in the shape of a smile. That could be seen as on the nose, but I think it really works, especially being an early scene. I feel like it works. We were just talking about David Bruckner having done Hellraiser, and the fact that I love The Night House, his previous movie. There's the scenes that I really loved in The Night House are the scenes where we're kind of sitting in the dark for a while, and there's like moments where the camera lingers enough to where you kind of start to think you might be able to see something, but you're actually not sure if there's even anything there or if it's your actual mind just playing tricks on you and not the movie doing it. Like it's your own mind because the camera knows when to linger. There's a couple of scenes like that in this that are very effective and very sort of subtle about it also. And more of those like, seeing a potential threat from very, very far away and not always being completely sure what you're looking at. That's always really great when a filmmaker can accomplish that. There's also some of these like transition thoughts. Like there's a transition shot through like a circular window that's very well done. And in the way they build tension also, where it's like even the calm scenes, where like she's in her own therapy, like she's with her own therapist having a session, and it's just them talking, but enough has been set up to where it feels like anything could happen pretty much. That even these scenes that are during the day and they're calm and they're kind of expositional, there's still a tensity in there, where it's like you're anticipating something, but you're not sure what, and it could be nothing, and to kind of have that feeling throughout the whole thing, where it's like it never really feels like there's a sort of, time to breathe moment because when you obviously if you were to go back now, there are those scenes that are just kind of for exposition and just there to kind of let you get a breath a little bit, but watching it like as a first time viewing, it was like everything just felt tense. Like there was always a sort of anticipation for something. So that was working really well. There's also a great use of the birthday song, where there is a birthday party and everybody's singing happy birthday, and there's this very bizarre moment, bizarre in a good way, where because obviously one of the most predictable things in the world is the happy birthday song. We all know it, we've all heard it a billion times. So the idea to talking about that anticipation feeling, there's a moment where they're in the middle of the happy birthday song, and then they just sort of all drag a note out in unison that goes and goes and goes, and this and like just when you're thinking the song's about to end, it doesn't, like everything slows down, and it's this really weird effect that's really well done and really does its job well. So just stuff like that. Like just the unexpected and bizarre can just be the way to go sometimes, and I feel like this movie really understands that. And like I was talking about with the big jump scare, where it's like sometimes it doesn't really have to serve a purpose if it's just bizarre, and like it is that jolt of just some, like, once you kind of found a groove and you're like, oh, I know everything from here on, and it'll just throw something at you just to make sure that's not that's not the case. That's yeah, that's a filmmaker that's in control, very much so. And like I was talking about, it all comes back to that confidence I was talking about before, that the movie carries. So I do very much like that. I guess at the end of the day, it is still structurally, just kind of another sort of supernatural movie, but it's really about those things that it kind of throws in, those wrenches that it throws in, and those things that it kind of tweaks just a little bit to make sure it's a little more interesting than the other things like it. Um, and I can see, I think I've already heard some complaints. The fact that it more or less goes monster movie, like in the last 10 or 15 minutes or so, I can kind of see being a bit off putting. But I don't know, I kind of felt like we built up to it enough, and I wasn't really sure where else it was going to go. That I honestly didn't really mind the ending that much. Of course, by ending, I mean like the last 15 minutes or so. So, yeah, so if it's just well executed like that, like I said, there's not. People can say that things are derivative, and sometimes I feel like it's absolutely true. But there's also sometimes where I feel like it can be kind of a lazy criticism because things feeling like other things, number one, is just always going to happen at some point. But there's also where you can take those things and those, structures that we all know, and as long as you're, like, keeping them fresh and doing other things with them, I don't really see too much of what the big deal is. It's like the argument about, plots versus stories, and how those are two completely different things. So, yeah, so that stuff didn't really bother me. So it's very well made and very creepy. Maybe a little heavy on, like, the jump factor at times, but I feel like they make up for it enough, with interesting visuals, interesting ideas, and little curveballs. So, yeah, I'm good with that. So let's go on to Pearl, and just right away. We talked about X when it came out back in March, I think, and I just kind of wax poetic about how much I love Ty West and just everything that he does, and how much I loved. I was so psyched seeing X in a theater because it was like, because Ty West has always had such a cinematic feel to him. But all his movies are so small; they've never gotten the wide releases that X and Pearl have. So to see this and just see how cinematic he is, with these sort of small budget movies, and these movies that really feel like small ideas also, that he can make feel big because of the way he executes them, is just fantastic. I really fucking love that dude, and I love him even more because of this wonderfully insane idea to do this trilogy, just seemingly out of nowhere, is perfect. And I think it's the way that he has set it up now that I love this idea even more after seeing Pearl, because of what Pearl does as far as being a prequel, the start of a trilogy, whatever, and how it's not trying to build like a universe necessarily. It's just trying to tell a story. It doesn't even feel like it's trying to connect to another movie. It just feels like a standalone movie about a character we just happen to have already met. Just many, many years after, decades after the fact. Because this one is set in 1918 during a pandemic, which is of course brilliant because that's when this was made, was like the very height of all that. And it's like I think I had heard they had made X, and then just pretty much in secret they just kind of went ahead and made this like right after. And it's kind of he and Mia Goth seem to kind of have this Tarantino Uma Thurman thing going on a little bit, with the creation of this character, which is great, because Goth even has a writing credit now, and you get the sense that this is coming from a place of these two just finding a character that they both really love, and also just having so much fun telling her story. Where, like I said, they can take a movie that's technically very small, but make it feel so grand and theatrical and cinematic and all that. Where it starts with like this pretty much the same shot that X started with, where we're coming through the barn entrance, But where that was like really, really ominous, because at that point it was a crime scene. Now everything feels like it's like grander and like out of this, 50s musical or something. It's like this movie is it basically feels like a 50s musical just without the songs. Like, and there's something so odd about that, because we know, when odd in a good way, obviously, where it's like we know what this character becomes, and usually that's like this. There's a thing that kind of comes with prequels, this stigmatism, where it's like, well, if we already know where this is headed, then what's the point? But it's like this is just such a completely different movie, yet also sets up the character to the point that we get a sense that this has always been the case for her, but it's like I said, it doesn't feel like it's trying to connect to something else. It feels like it feels like we're meeting Pearl for the first time, and then there'll just be these little hints of what she'll become later, that kind of register, and those just feel kind of rewarding. Like it feels like we're getting like this payoff, especially for the people that were like really big fans of X, like I was. God, I feel like X came out in March. I think I've seen it at least 4 times now. I really, really like it. And so, going into this, it's also interesting that we do see stuff like the way she was dancing, like after she kills RJ and X. But here, it's all like, like I said, so innocent, but also like grand. And this, like, she feels like almost disgustingly innocent. And it's what's interesting also is that she plays that off so well. Goth plays that off so well that sometimes you can almost, maybe for a second, forget the character that we're dealing with and the character that we know this person will become, which is really great. And that's a case also where it kind of feels like it's going against that sort of prequel stigmatism about us knowing everything. Is it's like, if it can get us involved in us enough in what's going on with this one, then we're not even going to really be thinking about the fact that this is leading to a movie and a story that we've already seen. And this person's, outcome we already know. and that just kind of goes away, because we see this stuff, like I said, the character traits that we know, like she's still super, super horny. We still get the scene where she fucks the scarecrow. But there's also the stuff where she says, like, I'm gonna be a star. And that's interesting because we do kind of get that vibe where it's like, oh yeah, the old woman that was like, worried about aging and was worried about her appearance and how she was to others and the dancing and stuff like that. It's like, yeah, I believe that when that old person was this age, she wanted to be a star. But then there's that second connection of, oh, she sounds exactly like Maxine does many, many years from now, decades from now. And there's that connection also. And I will just say this, I don't think this is a spoiler, because it's just, the movies just don't go there, so there's nothing to spoil. But I think another thing that I really loved about this, that I was kind of expecting, that I wasn't sure about, was I was wondering if we were eventually going to get some kind of reveal that Pearl and Maxine are, like, related. Like, related by blood or something, because obviously they're both played by Mia Goth, and obviously because of that, she's identical. But I like the fact that they just don't do that. Like, there's just those kind of connections. The way Pearl was, wanting to be a star, versus what Maxine is doing in her own industry. And the fact that these are from two completely different places, where Pearl's coming from this very sort of conservative place, and Maxine is anything but. And like I said, bringing that together and having those connections be in there without anything being forced, is the really appealing nature of what's going on here with these movies and this sort of trilogy that's building. And the fact that it's, that we're gonna have 3X movies at the end of this to make triple X. It's like it all just I have no idea if it was always meant to be this trilogy, but even if it wasn't, it feels like it was. It feels like it was always a complete idea, which is very important when doing stuff like this. Like I said, even if they don't feel like, we're making some universe and that this is going to be something that goes directly into X or anything like that, but it still feels like this complete sort of thing that's happening. and it feels kind of unique especially in this age we're in now, where like everything has to connect directly, where like every prequel that comes out has to have the scene that happened directly before the movie that it's going into. And it's like the fact that this movie's just happy being the story that it is, and with us filling the blanks in between, is, yeah, this is, I just love how like sort of original and unique this feels. And it's like, it's interesting to bring up original, because when we talked about X, we talked about how there were like a million different homages to other horror movies, but when you add this to it now, it definitely feels like its own sort of thing is going on here, and I just really love this. And Goth's performance itself, where I don't know that she tops her performance in X, because going back and forth between Maxime being a very powerful character in this very powerful performance, and then old Pearl being its own unique and powerful performance, that's insane how she was able to pull that off. And here, while she's not, it doesn't have the dual role going on, so it might seem like she doesn't have as much to do, there's still some unthinkably wild shit that she's doing here. There is the idea that she can go from, that sort of innocent nature we were talking about, and then she can go from innocent to, like, this sexual deviant that she is, or we can also go from innocent to, like, insane and manic, and then like fully psychotic, just kind of at the drop of a hat, and all of that convincingly also, because that's something like I can imagine it being what we've talked about before. Some of the problems I have, where when you can see an actor's wheels turning, and it's like you can see an actor saying like, "Oh, I'm giving an amazing performance because I'm doing this and then I'm doing this," and you can see the choices they're making. I don't see that with Goth in either one of these movies, and she's doing so much. But like everything feels organic from every emotion to the next, and it's always at a 10. Like if she's playing innocent, it's up to 10. If she's playing psychotic, it's up to 10, and that goes back and forth. And it's never, but it also feels like there's just enough subtlety in it also that it never feels like overkill. It always feels like this is exactly where the character is, and we just have to hold on because it's kind of unpredictable where she's going to be at the next emotion. And that's crazy that she can do this. It's like almost inhuman how well she pulls this off. And she can scream in agony enough to where she'd fit in an Ari Aster movie perfectly also. So, well, that's something that definitely needs to happen. So when we get to some other big moments, one thing I had heard about that I kind of thought was being a bit exaggerated was the idea of, I kept hearing about a 9-minute monologue. And so typically stuff like that tends to get built up. And it's like every now and then it's exactly as advertised, like the pie scene in, A Ghost Story or something like that. But it's like, when I heard, like, she pulls off a 9-minute monologue, it was like, it gets to her audition scene, and it was like, oh, this must be it. This would be the place for a monologue scene. And it's a dance scene, and it's a great dance scene. And then when we go beyond that, then we get our monologue scene in a different scene where she's just sitting at the house. And what's interesting about it is you don't really realize that it's happened until after it's happened, which is the beauty of it, and how it was done in just the perfect way, because you would think if the camera is going to... We talked about in Smile how great it is when a camera knows when to just hold, to not move and just sit in one place and just hold a shot, especially if it's on an actor. And while that shot in Smile was no dialogue, here Pearl has a giant monologue. And like I said, she's so engrossing, and you're so being pulled in by her whole story, and we're kind of seeing, like, we're practically seeing the transition into who she'll be in old age, when she's still this innocent young person. Where it's going back and forth between how psychotic she is, but also how she just wants to be loved. And you would think the camera holding without cutting away on somebody talking for like 9 minutes is something that you would notice. Like halfway through the scene, you'd be like, "Oh wow, this has been going for a while." Um, that didn't. I don't think I thought about it until the cut happened, and the cut's so subtle too. It's just to the other person in the room. It's so nonchalant about itself. It's not showing off at all. That's the thing lately that I've been hating about long takes is how showy they are and how it's let's see how many things we can fit into a long take. And it's just really worn out its welcome and it's lost its magic. And so you have this where it's just one shot where the camera's not moving and it's just an actor acting. And an actor that feels so organic that you kind of just forget that it's even somebody acting. And once again, if you want to bring in the prequel stigmatism, this is somebody that we know where they end up, we know their outcome, we know what it is that they're doing. There should be no more to learn about this character, and yet she can just talk. And that's it for like 9 minutes, and that's the only thing that matters when we're looking at it. That's the only thing, and not anything in the room, not the people around us, not any other intrusive thoughts. Just this actor and their monologue and what it is they're saying. Everything else vanishes around. And that's, like I said, crazy. Like, I don't even... It's crazy. I love Mia Goth. I love this performance, and I love Ty West, and I love him knowing exactly how to do this, and get just the exact desired effect. It's wild. Like why he's not considered like why you don't hear his name as much when you hear some of the big names that are going on right now is beyond me. Especially since he's been around. House of the Devil made its splash in 2009, 13 years ago, and I still feel like I don't hear his name enough when we're talking about people in this genre, in this day and age, all this stuff, of directors in general, and that's. Yeah, because he's really such an amazing talent and really knows this genre through and through and how to handle it, but also totally make it his own. Even if he's throwing a million montages in it, can still immediately make it his own also. And I said, as far as, this being a prequel without trying too hard to be, without feeling like it's setting up a franchise, just being the story and then just ending, it's... Yeah, I'm glad that we live in the era to see these movies happen and a director like Wes. So, that's where I'm going to leave that, and let's continue with the praise, because the next movie is Barbarian, and it's... Like, we got off to a bumpy start with Hellraiser, but this is a good year for horror. I know we've had some great years for horror, but I feel like we're really kind of on a roll this year. In this great way. I do need to say right away about Barbarian, and you've probably heard this already, it's been out long enough. I'm not going to spoil the movie, but just to even get anywhere with talking about it, I might say some things that are a little more revealing than somebody going in blind would probably want to hear, so... And once again, I don't think anybody going in blind would find a video like this anyway, so... but I will just put it out there that I'm not going to spoil it, but I will have to say some things that I would not say to somebody that I would want to go into this as blind as possible. So, the idea of this movie, and it had, its fair share of marketing. It had, like, I heard that it had, like, the TV spots where it's like it was the night vision clips of people in the audience reacting, and then like outside the theater saying, "Oh, it's crazy." And typically that kind of marketing is either for the first Paranormal Activity movie or shit movies. And so I was a little like, "Oh, that's what they've resorted to for this." But then as it went on, when it was like, I think it was at a festival or something, and I had heard about how unique it was and how crazy it was and how insane it was. I think one headline said it was the what the fuck movie of the year, which is like, yeah, we hear that a lot, and sometimes it's just movies doing shit for the sake of it. and not try to tell a story or anything like that. Just trying to be shocking or something. But Zach Kreger, of the Whitest Kids You Know, interestingly enough, there's something about people who start in comedy, in like sketch comedy, um, bringing horror to life in these really unique and interesting ways. It's weird, but it's very much working so far. Um, in the way this movie starts off, where it seems like we're going like what's interesting. I think what really, really, really works about this movie so much is that I would say if I was talking about a movie that has a lot of turns in it, I would say, oh, well, it starts off as a movie you've seen a million times before until it's not that. But honestly, it's not even. It doesn't even seem like it's trying to do that. It just kind of already seems like right away, before you even go in knowing it's gonna have some massive turns in it, right away it feels like, oh, this is interesting. I'm wondering where this is going, and it's like I feel like you feel that right away for it. It doesn't even like try to trick you by saying like, oh, here's this thing you already know. It immediately starts off as I feel like something's wrong. I'm not quite sure what. I'm not quite sure like what, like where it's gonna go and when the problems are gonna start. But something's definitely off, and I'm very curious where this is gonna go. And it just starts with two characters. Our main character, who's shit. I meant to look up her name again before I started, and I forgot. Because she's very, very good in this, so it's an absolute shame that I don't remember her fucking name. But it's her and Bill Skarsgård at like this Airbnb that they've both been like double booked for by accident. And so they're kind of stuck here together because it's storming and it's a bad neighborhood. So what's ingenious about this is the casting of Bill Skarsgård, because obviously he's Pennywise and this is a horror movie, so you're like, oh well, he's untrustworthy for sure. And he may just have, this look about him to where it's like, oh yeah, he could be charming, he could be, this sort of romantic lead or something. But then there's another side where it's like, oh, he could also be a serial killer or something. And the way that he can kind of play a fine line here where you're not quite sure which direction that's gonna go. It's very like Cillian Murphy in like the opening parts of Red Eye. Where it's like he could be threatening, but he also seems pretty charming and likable. And so it's like, and then as it goes on and he's talking and it's like, oh, he knows about this thing, and it's like, is it charming that he knows that? Or does it feel like he knows too much? Is it suspicious? I don't know. And there's always those questions being asked. And this is before any of the wild shit happens. This is before it becomes a different movie entirely. So it's like, it's already kind of setting you up. Where it's like, you want to know what happens next. And it's at this point in the movie that you have no idea. You don't know that you have no idea where this is going to go, because what's really great about this, and like I feel like we've seen movies do this before, we've talked about this before, but it's not just that the movie takes a sudden left turn and feels like it becomes a different movie, like From Dusk Till Dawn syndrome. It's not like that. What it feels like is we watch a movie in full, and then right after it, its sequel starts. Is what it feels like. It feels like watching a movie and then its sequel back to back, in the condensed into one regular feature length runtime. And because then that's when Justin Long comes into the story, and Justin Long, the things he has done for this genre, he needs to be on some wall of fame. Because I feel like every time Justin Long is in a horror movie, he commits like nobody else. And I've talked before about with Jeepers Creepers and Tusk, where Justin Long has a horror scream for the ages. Justin Long's horror scream is fucking terrifying in any context. And I love it. And of course he was also in Drag Me to Hell. And now this, and it's like, every time I feel like every time he needs to be careful because he's set a precedent now. Every time Justin Long is in a horror movie now, expectations are through the fucking roof. So yes. And like I said, it starts like it's going to be a completely different movie where he is an actor that's now going through a Me Too controversy. And like it's just like, okay, where is it going now? This is odd. And then it goes in its direction, and then it kind of gets to a point where it kind of toys with us one more time. Where very late into the movie, Richard Brake is introduced. And he's another character where it's like, he's another actor where it's like, we've definitely seen him as very terrifying. Richard Brake is great, and I think everything I've ever seen him in, and I feel like I've seen him in a lot of things. And he's another one of those actors where it's like when you see him, it's like, oh, this guy's not good news. But there's also something he has here that does make him seem very sort of normal. And maybe there's there's maybe just something a little off, just kind of in general, like inherently. But he seems more approachable than he has before. But we kind of get the sense, because we've seen the other events in the movie, that this might be leading somewhere bad, but we're just not quite sure. It feels so loosely connected to what we've seen before, and while that would normally be annoying, there's just something so riveting about this, where it's like, this is normally the point where you start trying to think ahead, where you're like, how could this possibly connect to this? And by doing that, I think, is when you get frustrated, and when you're like, oh, this movie makes no fucking sense, because I'm trying to connect this to this, and it doesn't make sense. And it's like, this is one of those movies that's best to just follow. I almost feel like it's symbolic that these Richard Brake scenes, a lot of them are like, there's long shots where we're following him from behind, and it's like, because it was at this point where I was like, you know what? I'm not trying to think ahead. I'm just gonna sit here and let this movie take me to wherever it's going, and I will just be there. I will be this movie's passenger and just let it take me there. And that's a place where I feel like a movie has to be riveting enough to get you to that point. Because if a movie is doing that in a shitty way, where it's like, oh, we're doing this thing, but now we're doing this thing, but now we're doing this thing, yeah, that can probably be annoying, and can be like, it's maybe trying to be a little too clever. And it's like, and it's being intentionally vague, and like, it had almost like this pompous sense of, oh, I know something you don't know, and I'm gonna drag you through the mud for what might be a really underwhelming reveal or underwhelming climax or whatever. But I just had such faith in this movie from everything it had done up to this point, to where I felt lost in a sense when Richard Brake showed up, but it was like, I just know this is going somewhere. I'm confident in the movie, and I'm engrossed enough. This is what we talked about with Hellraiser. This is what Hellraiser was missing. That feeling of just like feeling sucked into it, and it's like, I'm just gonna go where you take me. And it's so exhilarating when a movie can do that. And like I said, where you don't really feel like, because as far as feeling like you've seen it before, like, there is a point early on where I got a little worried, because it started to feel like it might be a wandering around in the dark kind of movie. You know those movies where, people are in a house or whatever, and then there's just a very long stretch of time where somebody has a flashlight and they're just walking around the house. Every now and then a shadow might appear, but for the most part it's just people walking in the dark. And I was kind of afraid it was going to be that. It's not that. It's not a walking around in the dark movie. There's a little tiny bit of walking around in the dark, but there's a destination in that dark, I assure you. So, yeah, and a destination for the movie, in that sense also. And the idea of just having intriguing characters, and this sort of, what's the word I'm looking for? I don't know, I keep wanting to say juxtaposition, maybe that's it. But we have Bill Skarsgård, where it's like, oh, is he, threatening, is he bad, or is he charming, and is he good? We don't really know. And we have to kind of wait to see how things are going to unravel before we know for sure. Justin Long is the opposite, because as soon as Justin Long comes into the story, sporting my name, go figure, It turns out that he's a massive douchebag and potentially dangerous to women. Uh, so it's setting him up as this bad guy. But then, like, as the movie goes on, it's like, oh, is he gonna sort of turn around? Is he gonna have, like, kind of a bit of a heroic role? Is he gonna have kind of an arc? And it's, like, kind of the opposite of how we felt about the Bill Skarsgård character going in. And that's just so intriguing and stuff. Like, you talk about, oh, the movies are much better when they have intriguing characters. For a movie like this especially, this is this is just about everything you'd want in that regard. So so I was on board for all this, and I think you know what really works about this also that I don't want to go overlooked is that this movie obviously has a lot of secrets, but as they unravel, I noticed that at the end of the run, like when the movie is over and it cuts to credits, it wasn't really that complicated. And that's the thing, is when movies tend to have a lot of reveals like this, pretty much the first thing they do wrong is that they way overcomplicate themselves. And they want to do like a lot of things at once, and they want to do like this as elaborate of a reveal as possible. This one is actually, like I said, it feels like it has a lot of secrets and a lot of things up its sleeve, but at the end of its run, it's not overly complicated. And I think I especially appreciate that, because that's usually where it kind of goes wrong when you have movies like this where you're kind of waiting for them to unravel. And because more often than not, if a movie is all about its secrets, those secrets are going to be underwhelming. It's just almost always the case. So here, like I said, just pretty much coming down to this is what's going on, and that's that. It's, yeah, that's the way to do it, as pretty much as simply as possible, while also being something very hidden in the depths of not just this place, but Zach Cregger's wonderfully twisted mind. So, yes, this is probably my favorite horror movie of the year. This, or I loved Bodies. But this one, just for its sheer originality, might be up there for me, unless I'm forgetting a major one, but yeah. So, let's finish on something, let's finish on The Invitation. Now, before I go into this, you'll notice I have a separate notebook for this one. I'm hoping this doesn't get too ridiculous, because I saw The Invitation, the one from this year, with Natalie Manuel, not Karen Kusama's movie from 2015. And I saw it at the drive-in, and this was probably over a month ago. The movie came out like at the end of August, and has somehow still been out. Like I think it only just left our theater like this past week or the week before. And our theater is always quick to push stuff out as quickly as possible. This really stuck around, despite being something that got bad reviews, and didn't seem to have a shitload of marketing behind it. So this whole movie is just kind of interesting, and what I say about this also is I went to the drive-in. It was the only time I was able to get to the drive-in this year. I usually try to at least go twice over the summer, but this was the only time I was able to go, and that may or may not have influenced how I feel about it, because I'm always just kind of super psyched to be at the drive-in, and movies always seem like they're just a tiny bit better at the drive-in. They're a tiny bit more fun, and like the atmosphere is something different. So, and this just kind of felt like the kind of movie that was kind of perfect for that. So, despite its bad reviews and the fact that I went into it with very low expectations, I actually ended up liking this quite a bit. So, the thing about that, though, is that, like I said, this was well over a month ago. My plan was to come back, and at least, if not that night, at least within a day or two, go ahead and talk about it on camera, and then I'd just splice it into when I talked about the rest of the horror movies, and I didn't do that. So, my memory is trying to go back like over a month ago, after all this other stuff that I've seen, And because I was writing in pitch blackness, most of these notes are pretty much indecipherable. So we're gonna kind of try to figure this out. I'm gonna try to decode what I was talking about here as we go. So forgive me if that's an unappealing way to talk about this movie that I actually like. But we're gonna try to power through this real quick, and it's the last movie, so we can try to do this rather quickly. So I thought as it started, and kind of from the advertising, also like from the poster that I'd seen and a couple of like stills, and like banner ads, that there might have been like kind of a Crimson Peak vibe a little bit, and yeah, like there's some Crimson Peak in there. There's a little bit of Rebecca in there, and when she first gets to the house and like all of the staff is there outside and lined up, it was like, is this like horror Downton Abbey, like a horror version of Downton Abbey? Because that's actually kind of interesting. And yeah, it kind of feels like it's not that far off from that. But even before she gets to the house, we were talking in Smile about the use of early shots to set the tone, and it was interesting how I felt like the movie was winning me over quickly, given that I had low expectations for it and the fact that it had bad reviews, because we immediately get this lunch scene where she's meeting a guy that may or may not be trustworthy, and she's learning about the house, and this is how she's going to go there because she found out that she's like related to the people that live there. And the way this lunch scene is shot, where it's in a very big and tall building, a very big room with a very high ceiling, and the camera's like down here. So we get a shot of how massive this room is and how small they seem in comparison. And just right away, it felt like something was off. Like, this wasn't your typical lunch. Like, there was something sinister going on. And, of course, sure enough, that is the case. Because this is a horror movie. And she does have a best friend character that kind of feels like Rod and Get Out. The person saying, like, knows all the ins and outs of horror movies and knows what to do and what not to do, but of course she's going to be away from all this trying to say this when our main character is getting involved in everything. I think there's even... I remember getting more than one Get Out vibe. I think there's also a scene where somebody's like running at night, in this kind of bizarre moment that kind of tells you that everything's off. So this is going to be one of those movies where it does have the feeling of a lot of other things. But I don't know, as it goes on, it was, like I said, I think just the atmosphere of it was starting to win me over. And the kind of combining of not just that kind of stuff, but also the way they're combined. Like, it feels like a period movie, but it's obviously a present day movie. Like, so we have scenes where it's like, she looks like, she's in a movie set in, like, the Jane Austen era or something, but she's listening to, like, modern music while she cleans, like one of the maids. And stuff like that, where it's kind of like, it puts you in this place where you just feel like you're not really in a place that's of this, of this world. And that's when about the supernatural starts to leak into it, or what feels like the supernatural. It's not very scary for the most part. The thing I wrote down here next to not scary is claw hand. I'm trying to remember what that is. I think there might be like a claw hand jump scare or something, or like one comes out of the dark or like grabs a shoulder or something. So there's stuff like that. But what I do remember about scares are, there's a moment when I remember thinking to myself, this shit is why the dark is terrifying. Why adults are still scared of the dark. Where there is a moment when she's like looking at the foot of her bed in the dark, and there may be something there may not be something there, and then she looks up and there's like over the top of the bed also, and it's like just darkness and potential danger and potential monsters, whatever it may be that's here. And it's like, I felt like that was really... I do think the movie might be a little too dark visually, but I remember the atmosphere not being too, like, shaken by that. And because there's also, like, a playful nature to it, also. Like, I remember, like, a lead into a scare, or a scare involving a window, where it kind of felt like they were playing with our expectations a little bit and just having fun with that. having fun with, what we're going to anticipate. But yeah, as far as the cast, Emmanuel's performance is she's a very strong lead here, and I think that's going to help a lot. Because if the main character had been played by a shit actress giving a shit performance, I feel like that in itself could have made this a different movie, and a movie with less integrity. So what she's bringing here, I feel like really helps a lot with what's going on here, and kind of gets us through the stuff that might feel a bit more familiar, also, and across the fact that the movie isn't as scary as it could be, but it does have those moments that she's able to play off very well. Um, and like when it finds that atmosphere, I just in general found myself rooting for it. And like I said, I don't know if this was the drive-in sort of intoxicating me or what, but I just kind of felt into it after a while. I feel like it took a little bit. Like there was the lunch scene that pulled me in. And it was like, oh, just visually alone and just the feelings it gives. Maybe it's better than it's been built up to be. But it's like, I do feel like there was a moment kind of in the middle where it felt like it really found its atmosphere, and it was like, where I started like actively thinking like, okay, this is actually good. I'm not sure where the negative reviews are coming from. So, yeah, and there's the nail clipping scene, where like they really, like the way the tension like really ramps up sort of step by step as it goes on. There's a very effectively disgusting dinner scene that doesn't feel like disgusting for the sake of it or overkill. Like it's a moment that's earned because it feels like it's kind of the start of the payoff of the whole movie. So and it just gets wild from there. And I don't think the slowness is a bad thing actually. Like it's actually for a horror movie with not a great like consensus opinion about it, where people just really aren't taking to it. I was surprised how well it used slow burn for what it was, and like I said, there's some other characters here that add the atmosphere, like Sean Purdy was playing a butler again after he played Alfred on Gotham. Was kind of funny and felt a little bit like typecasting, but I did like seeing him play the directions his character goes, where he's kind of this threatening nature throughout the house, like this very sort of in control presence throughout the house. Yeah, so I think that's the most. I think the only other thing I wrote down here that I can actually read is Walter, who I think was like the main sort of love interest, who's also one of those cases where he's kind of walking the line where it's like, is he a love interest or is he sinister? We're not really sure, and what's going on with the house, what's going on with the people that live here. I wrote down that actor, in this role at least, reminds me of Rami Malek. He was giving me Rami Malek vibes a lot. So that kind of also gives you that vibe of, I'm pretty sure he's sinister, but I also can't quite tell. So, yeah, but all of that, all of those words and all that, trying to remember what the hell is written here, to basically say, after watching, I'm a little surprised by the negative reviews, but yeah, I was able to take to it. Once again, that could just be the drive-in experience speaking. So, yeah, so I think we can leave this at this. So, the next thing is going to be a versus, I think. And I'm also going to talk about Amsterdam and the Woman King, and then we'll go into more of the horror verses for the rest of the month. And another thing, we're going to talk about a couple of TV shows as well. So until whatever the next thing is, I think that's it.